The main character, whose name is Esmeralda Vanes, sat and drank tea with her parents. And then they told the girl that it is time for her to think about marriage, and they decided that the husband of the main character should be one of those who constantly helped their family. Her father calmly looked at the girl and explained that her sisters were also married at random, and asked the girl not to even think about saying that she did not want it. Esmeralda Vines realized that she shouldn't have argued, so she awkwardly agreed. But then she remembered that her sisters had begged her not to marry like that, because it was the worst thing she could do for her future life. But she couldn't argue about that now. Then, satisfied with his daughter's answer, the father said that as soon as the date of her wedding was chosen, he would organize a meeting and told the girl that she could leave already. And she curtsied and agreed with her father, but left the room thinking that she didn't want this, and she wasn't going to ruin her life like this. And as she walked out the door, she was determined not to trade her life for any riches, because she didn't want to be with a man she didn't like, and she didn't want to live a life full of regrets like her sisters. So Esmeralda Vanes decided that she would find a groom before she met the man who had been chosen by her father, and realized that she must find a husband on her own. Eventually, the girl found herself at a banquet among aristocrats who were drinking alcohol and talking among themselves in a madly merry way. And then Esmeralda Vanes thought that despite the fact that she had come here and was brimming with confidence but without a plan, really should not have come, after which she sadly remarked that it was her first social event. So she had no acquaintances, and under such circumstances, she would never be able to find a husband and just look shameful. But afterwards, she resolutely convinced herself that if she really looked hard enough, she would meet a young man, and she decided that she should use her strength, namely the power of positivity. Then she decided that before she started her search, she should have some sweet cakes, because it was a good way to relax and then start working out a plan. But eventually, unexpectedly, the girl turned around and noticed that another aristocrat had fallen slipping on her dessert, and grudgingly inquired who had dropped something like that. Then the madly surprised Esmeralda Vines realized that it was her, and at that moment, the madly angry girl was shouting and asking where the culprit was and trying to find out whether he was now hiding. And the madly frightened Esmeralda Vines realized that if now she was caught and found out that it was her fault, she would definitely not only be scolded. So she resolutely began to run away, and she mentally apologized to the fallen lady and hoped she hadn't hurt herself. Eventually finding herself on the balcony, Esmeralda Vines continued to eat her dessert and thought that it seemed that she had absolutely ruined everything. But her consolation was the cake that she'd been able to take with her, and so she was glad for that at least. But at that moment, a young man came to the balcony and said that he had finally managed to find the main character. Then he stated that it was the girl who was the cause of the incident in the hall. But it seems that Esmeralda Vines was not thinking about that at all, and only excitedly admired his face. But the next moment she, thinking about the young man's appearance, accidentally dropped her cake on the earth, and she screamed excitedly, trying not to drop the rest of the cake. But the young man calmly explained that everything was fine, as he had not planned to step on a piece of cake and fall. And then looking at him, the protagonist thought that this young man even had a special aura. But after putting the surviving desserts on the balcony, the girl curtsied and said that she would like to greet him, albeit belatedly, and then introduced herself and asked if she could find out the young man's name. It seemed to be Alfred Midford, and he bowed and said that he was very pleased to meet the lady as it was his first meeting today. Looking at him, Esmeralda Vines only smiled and said that for her, it was also her first meeting at today's event. And she thought about the fact that it was the first time she had heard the name of this young man, but it seemed to her that he was from a famous family and that he had come here. Then she told the young man that even though he knew that she was the cause of the unpleasant situation, she kept silent and thanked him for it. But he only calmly said that she should not have thanked him, because he just thought that there was no need to make a scandal even more. Then thinking and remembering, the fallen girl said that it was quite funny to see how she stepped on the cream fell. After that, she screamed for a long time and tried to find the culprit. And hearing this, the protagonist laughed and said that apparently Mr. Alfred Midford was quite funny, but he calmly explained that if the girl had been there, she would have seen everything with her own eyes and understood what he was talking about. But Esmeralda Vines only awkwardly said that she was so confused that she just ran away, and she had no time to look at it. And Alfred Midford only calmly reported that it was indeed a great loss. But at that moment, the protagonist looked at the young man and asked him if he liked absurd things, but he calmly said that he did not hate such things. And then Esmeralda Vines looked at him and asked him if he would like to enter into a romantic relationship with her. The man was surprised at first, but immediately pulled himself together and looked at the girl carefully. He said that he was really amazed that she had said such a thing to him the first time they met. But she calmly said that she would take his words as compliments and asked what his answer would be. But he calmly said that he had to think about it for a while because the proposal was quite unexpected and he had to weigh everything. Esmeralda Vines smiled and agreed and said that she did not want to rush the young man, but because of certain circumstances, she wanted to ask him to send a letter to her family's mansion within a week if the answer was positive. Then the man bent down to kiss her hand and said that he would like to end their meeting on the fact that it was time for him to leave. Then he left at once, and the embarrassed Esmeralda Vines looked after him. The young man's name was Garou, and looking at him calmly, Alfin Midford said that he had met a rather amusing lady tonight. And Garou, who was excited by this answer, asked what sort of person she was, if the young man was talking about her like that. But he calmly told his friend that they had met for the first time today, and the girl had immediately suggested that they enter into a romantic relationship. And it seems that Garou was really shocked by this response. But after taking himself in hand, I would inform him that all the ladies in the empire were too nervous to approach and talk to the young man, so they just watched. And this mysterious stranger just did what all these girls dreamed of. But at that moment smiled at the words of his friend. Alfin Midford said that he does not understand what he's talking about, because it is unlikely that all the girls would like to be near him, but then admitted that it is a stranger really interested him. In the end, a week passed and the protagonist, walking in the garden, thought that it had been too long, but Alfin Midford still has not sent her a reply, and she used to think that the guy might agree. But apparently things did not go the way she wanted. But at that moment, she turned suddenly at the sound of a carriage coming up, and out of it came a young man who handed Esmeralda a letter and said that it was from Mr. Alfin Midford. And then she took the letter in mad surprise and began to read it. The letter said that Alfin Midford had decided to agree to a romantic relationship with Lady Esmeralda, and if the girl still had not changed her mind, she could come to his family mansion in the carriage he had sent, because there was something he wanted to talk about. And as soon as she finished it, the young man asked if the girl was going to go, and she happily said yes. But then she thought about the fact that she was about to go to an official meeting, so she couldn't go like that because she was now quite tired. Her hair was messy, and she was wearing the first dress she could find in the closet. So she awkwardly asked if the man could wait 10 minutes for her because she needed to change her dress, and he agreed and hurried her off. In the end, the protagonist called anew on bursting into the room, immediately began to dress up, and in the end, after a couple of minutes, she was already fully prepared and satisfied with her appearance. But as she ran out of the room, she was seen by her mother, who looked at her and wondered where she was going and why she was in such a hurry. But Esmeralda Vines knew at once that it was too soon to tell them about Alfin Midford, so she said that she wanted to go to a friend's house, and her friend had also sent her a carriage. Her mother was surprised enough, but the girl assured her that she would be back soon, and she thought that after she had talked to Alfin, she would be sure to tell her mother. And then going downstairs and finally convinced that it was not all a dream, she turned mentally to Mr. Alfin Midford and told him that she was on her way to him. But in the end, when she got to the manor, she was literally shocked by its size and luxury because it really was incredible. But then she ordered herself to stay calm because it was inappropriate for her to be so nervous. And finally, after a couple of knocks on the door, the butler came out to greet Lady Esmeralda, bowed and said that he was honored to have her in the house, and further excitedly informed her that she had come to meet Mr. Alfin. And the butler said he was expecting her and offered to show her out. When the girl went inside, she looked around excitedly after the butler and thought about the fact that the manor was really huge. And she did not understand who this young man was, since he had such a huge mansion at his disposal. And in the next moment, the butler took her to the door and informed the gentleman that the girl had arrived, and having received permission to let her in, wished her a good time. The girl curtsied excitedly and thanked the butler for his help. In the end, when she went inside, she immediately found an insanely calm and handsome young man, and immediately thought that he was still as beautiful as when they first met, but immediately scolded herself for such thoughts and said that she should come to her senses immediately. But at that moment, noticing her confusion, the young man smiled and welcomed Esmeralda to his mansion and said that the girl was probably surprised by the sudden invitation, and he was insanely grateful that she had agreed after all. But the excited Esmeralda Vines said that he should not have apologized for such an apology, because such an offer should have been really well thought out. Then she added awkwardly that she was actually very happy that the young man had agreed and that he had only smiled and said that from today on they were lovers. And looking carefully at Alf and Mitford, Esmeralda Vines agreed and said that in that case they should think of a way to address each other. At first, Alf and Mitford didn't understand why it was necessary, but Esmeralda Vines calmly explained that it was unlikely that the boy planned to address her as lady all the time, for it would be much better to address her by her first name. But then she thought that he could also address her by the shortened version of her name. Hearing this, the young man smiled, but said that in that case Esmeralda Vines could call him by his first name. Hearing this and smiling badly, she thanked him. Then she saw the sweets that had been placed on the table and immediately took one cake and began to take a bite. But at that moment, a young man approached her and asked if her family had the title of Count. She excitedly agreed. Afterwards, she stated that the question was really a normal one. After all, if you think about it, the young people knew nothing about each other at all. And then Alf and Mitford confessed that he had invited her here for that very reason, as he wanted to tell her a little about himself. And then the young man seriously informed that he is the Marquis and also the Emperor's watchdog that solves the affairs of secret organizations that the constables can't cope with. And also he eliminates groups that rebel against the Emperor. And he is also the one who solves inexplicable cases whose causes are unknown, thus saving His Majesty the Emperor from worries. But at that moment, the man smilingly inquired if the protagonist was ready to do such things with him. But it seems that such a question the girl had absolutely not expected. And at that moment, an indignant cry went through her mind as to why Alf and Mitford was asking it so suddenly. But after noticing his uneasiness, the young man asked what she thought about his proposal. She, after a little thinking, began to look for a solution to the situation because she only wanted to get a lover and not an imperial dog, and so she did not know what excuse to come up with. But then she got up from her seat and excitedly said that her parents might be against a romantic relationship if they didn't get married in the future, and then thought that was a really good tactic since marriage in the long run was supposed to scare him. But at that moment, to her great surprise, the man only smiled and then informed the girl that in such a case she really had nothing to worry about, as he was not against taking her as his wife. As a result, on the same day, the young man and the protagonist went to the house of her parents. And then Alf and Mitford said that he came to them to get a blessing for their romantic relationship with the prospect of marriage. And the excited protagonist that sat next to her thought that surely her father would not agree to such an inappropriate proposal. But he only calmly looked at them and said that he gave them his blessing, and then added that although his daughter was not very capable, she would definitely take good care of Alfina Mitford. But he smiled calmly and said that it was the opposite. He would be the one to take care of his daughter so that she would not need anything. And then the protagonist thought that surely her father accepted the young man so easily because he was the Marquis. After all, he had it all: strength, looks, an imperial family, and he was literally perfect. Whereupon she reflected sadly that she was sure that her father had given his permission because he thought of a useful connection with the imperial family. And she literally despised such a capitalistic trait in her father. At that moment, interrupting the silence, Alf and Mitford turned to Esmeralda's father and said that since his relationship with Esmeralda would be fixed by marriage in the future, he would like his daughter to move to his mansion, and asked if the man would give his consent to such a thing. And the agitated protagonist only wondered why the man was asking such a question. But at that moment, absolutely unexpectedly, the father, even after thinking, gave his permission and told his daughter not to trouble the Marquis with her actions. After that, hiding tears, the protagonist thought that now it was officially a relationship with a future marriage. And if the marriage in the future will not happen, then she could really die at the hands of her father. In the end, Alf and Mitford thanked the father of the protagonist and said goodbye. And now they were already riding in the carriage. The young man asked the girl if she is not worried now, and if all the problems are settled. And the girl just thought about the fact that obviously everything went wrong as she had planned, because she just wanted to get a simple romantic relationship and did not understand why in the end it turned out this way, because she now certainly cannot return everything back. But at that moment, the guy literally shone and confessed that he had been busy all week preparing the room for the main character, and he literally read perfection in him, because he had thought out everything to the smallest detail and was so sure that he would be allowed to do it that he didn't even doubt it. And so even Esmeralda Vines thought that she was no longer surprised by such a thing. But in the end, when the protagonist looked around her room, she immediately shrieked with delight, for everything looked really perfect. And Alfin Midford decided Happy reported that he was madly relieved that the girl liked it, and she only happily thanked him for such care. Then the man said that they would soon have dinner, so the girl should come as soon as everything was ready. Then he introduced her to the maid and told her that from now on she would take care of her. And saying goodbye and saying his words of pardon to the girl, smiled affectionately at Esmeralda. And at first, she literally glowed with joy that her fiancé was such an attractive and kind young man. But at once she scolded herself and realized that she certainly should not have trusted such a face. After all, she should not give up so easily to a young man. At that moment, she was approached by a maid and asked if she could help her change into a more comfortable dress. And the excited protagonist, who was distracted from her thoughts, happily agreed and accepted the help of her maid. Eventually, after a while, the girl came to dinner, and then the young man helped her to sit down and wooed her like a young lady. After which he sat across from her and suggested that she take her time and enjoy her meal while talking. And the girl was only agitated, looking at him agreed and thought that she was madly nervous. And then the young man, looking at her agitated face, stated that surely Esmeralda Vanes must have been confused after his words today. But the boy said that the girl would do a really good job. At which point she cut off some food and asked what kind of help she was going to be and what exactly she was going to do. And Alfin Midford calmly explained that she would not be in danger, and she would just help the young man with things he could not do on his own. But she was agitated, looking him over. She wondered if it was safe, but Alfin said in all seriousness that he made his promises that Esmeralda Vines would not be harmed by these matters. But at this point, the protagonist is serious. Looking at the young man, she wondered if he'd agreed to a relationship with her just to use her in this way. But at that moment, she encountered a rather upset look from the young man, who, looking down at the table in front of him, informed her that such words from Esmeralda Vanes really hurt him. After all, he liked her much more than he liked his job. And at that moment, a rather excited and embarrassed girl looked at such a face and said that in that case, she would also help Alfin Midford in his work, and at the same time, they would work on their relationship. But at that moment, he told the girl that earlier he had noticed how much she liked desserts, and said that he had asked the chef to make her a cake, and asked if she liked such an appetizer as well, and she only thanked him happily. And so passed her first day in the mansion. And then in the morning, she was awakened by her personal maid, who informed her that today's breakfast consisted of milk tea with cranberries and cornflour. And they had also prepared rustic bread and sweet pastries. And then the girl, sipping her tea, only reflected that such a breakfast was indeed a truly sumptuous one. But afterwards, she inquired where Alfin Midford was now, to which the girl calmly informed him that he was in his study. And so Esmeralda Vines thought it might be worth visiting him. So she did, and went into his office to wish him good morning and wondered if she had disturbed Alfin Midford's work. But he calmly assured her it was all right and asked if she had slept well. After which he looked her over with a smile and asked if Esmeralda Vines would like to go to the masquerade ball tonight. And she only wondered excitedly that there was a masquerade for a romantic place. And in her mind, at once there came into her mind the picture of Alfin Midford coming up to her and gazing intently into her face and admitting that even such a mask could not hide her dazzling beauty. So she said she would like to go there. And Alfin Midford said she would have to prepare a dress. And the protagonist only calmly suggested that they wear something identical, like masks, to make it obvious that it was time. Then the man, rising from his seat and seeing the girl off, said that she should be ready for tonight. And the girl agreed madly and happily. Eventually, at the agreed time, they arrived at the masquerade ball. And then the girl excitedly looked around at the crowd of people that stood in front of them in line, asked, was this really an invitation-only event? And the young man who agreed with his words escorted her further, and then handing the invitation to the guard, they went to the masquerade ball. And the protagonist, looking at all the people and also beautifully decorated halls, thought that the atmosphere here was really intriguing. And Alfin Midford only said that he was madly happy that the girl had enjoyed it. Then, at a careful look at her, told him that he would have liked Esmeralda Vines to be able to enjoy this atmosphere leisurely. But they had work to do. Then he said that, in fact, this masquerade ball was no ordinary event, and it was an auction house where expensive pets are sold and bought. The girl just wondered if there were expensive cats and dogs being sold here. But then the man immediately realized that the girl apparently thinking about the wrong thing and said that this is a place where they sell not cats and dogs, but people. And then the disturbed protagonist wondered who could do such a dirty deed. But Alfin Midford calmly explained that there was a special rule about this place and no single men were allowed in. but it was Esmeralda Vine's consent that got him in. Then approached and said that to prevent such horrible people from getting a second chance, they had to cut out their root, hence the place from which it had all begun. And it was for this purpose that Alfred Midford desperately needed Esmeralda's help. But she literally said with burning eyes that she agreed and asked how she could help the young man and what she had to do. But he only said with a smile that her role was not that complicated. She'd only had to participate in the auction. After seeing her reaction, he calmly informed her that in any case, he would not allow the girl to be sold to anyone. But the heroine herself was only excited and wondered whether she would be a commodity and not a buyer. Then the young man approached the two guards and, pointing at Esmeralda, said that he had brought her for today's auction. And the next moment, as soon as the men heard this, they immediately grabbed her by the arms. The young man approached her and told her that once she got inside, she was to stay close to the man who had wings and not to leave him. And if anything happened to her, all she had to do was report that Dr. V had sent her. And as soon as he had finished speaking, two insanely huge men began to lead her out further. And she only wondered excitedly what Alfred Midford had really come up with and called him a treacherous fox. In the end, a moment later, she was in her cage and thought that it was really a nightmare because she was really stupid if she was happy and thought that they would have a real date. And wondered how only a young man dared to act without even asking her opinion. But the next moment, the male guard hit her cage with his baton and told everyone sitting there that they had to be quiet if they wanted to be sold to a good owner. And hearing this, the girl was madly surprised. Then she looked around at the people sitting before her, among whom were old men and women and children. And then the worried Esmeralda Vanes wondered whether all these people would be sold as pets. But suddenly, among the other people, she noticed a young man with a tattoo of wings on his back. And then she realized with excitement that this was the man of whom Alfred Midford had spoken, and she realized that she should not go far from him. So she approached him, but he only gave her a displeased look and began to shout something in a language unknown to her, and as if to scold her for some act of hers, after which he resolutely turned away and walked away. But at that moment, a guard approached him and grabbed him by the hair and started to lead him away. And Esmeralda Vanes, who was madly displeased, only asked what he was doing, and then the man said that the auction had already started and therefore the young man had to be led to the stage. But then the protagonist, calmly looking over the guard, said that in that case, if they wanted to auction this guy first, she wanted to be second to him. But he only took a swing at her and wondered how she dared to open her mouth here. But she only mad-scared awkwardly screamed about being sent here by Dr. V. And at that moment, the man was surprised to freeze and said that in such a case, nothing could be done and ordered to follow. In the end, she did so, thinking that she had no idea who this man was. But in the end, it all worked out. Then she followed the young man with the wings and scrutinized him, not understanding what he was trying to tell her and what they should do now. But the next moment, she was blinded by an insanely bright light, and the voice of the announcer told her that they were opening the auction for which the ladies and gentlemen had waited so long. And today, and especially for them, they had prepared the goods they had longed for. Then the girl looked excitedly at the crowd while the presenters announced that today, especially for all comers, they would start the auction with a lucky bird that they had smuggled out of the kingdom of Akron. And then the protagonist, looking around at everyone present, realized that all these people really did not consider them people. And at this point, the presenter said that the initial bid on the young man was $5 million. But the protagonist shouted angrily and asked if all these people in this room had literally gone mad, if they thought human trafficking was normal, and wondered how rotten everyone was from the inside. And the excited young man who was looking at her had no idea how to behave in such a situation and seemed surprised by her determination. But the next moment, the host would approach her, swung his arm, and called the girl crazy, and was about to hit her with great force enough. But the next moment, Alfred Midford came out of nowhere and used his cane as a sword to place it on the young man's throat, and praised Esmeralda for her good work, saying that it was now his turn. Then fending off an attack from several guards, and the host announced that they would all be arrested for illegal human trafficking and kidnapping a prince of the kingdom of Akron, causing a threat to the country's security. And the protagonist only excitedly looked at the young man and wondered could this guy really be a prince. But this moment, while she pondered would it be madly displeased aristocrats, wondered why the man thought he really had the right to arrest them. But at that moment, the young man took off his mask and announced that he was Alfred Midford, the emperor's watchdog, and His Majesty the Emperor had given him the authority to arrest them all. The aristocrats immediately started to run out, but Carew appeared in front of them and looked at their pathetic escape attempt and said that it was really useless because the building had been surrounded for a long time, and not even a mouse could run through here unnoticed. After making sure that everything was under control, the young man began to walk towards the protagonist, and she pulled his arm towards him, hoping that he would help her up and rejoicing that he had saved her. On to her shock, the young man passed by, and before the lad greeted the third prince of the kingdom of Akron, Mr. Kesar, and the latter only wondered excitedly, did Alfin Midford speak their language? Alfin calmly approached the prince from behind, then helped him untie the ropes and told him that he was here by order of the emperor to rescue him, and he was overjoyed that the young man was all right. But he only calmly said that Alfin Midford's joy was obvious, for there would be no war with his kingdom. Then, pointing at the protagonist, he wondered if it was his girlfriend, and she was just thinking excitedly about the fact that her fiancé had just ignored her and walked past her, and he didn't care about her at all. But at that moment, looking carefully into the prince's face, Alfin Midford wondered if the girl had made some mistake towards him. But Mr. Kesar smilingly said that there was no such thing, and he thought that this girl was really determined, and he liked her. In response to this insanely proud, Alfin Midford only thanked Mr. Kesar for such a compliment. In the end, after a while, all the arrested were being led away, and Alfin Midford, who was standing next to Esmeralda, praised her for her good work today and specified that he was referring to the rescue of Prince Kesar. But she only grudgingly inquired, did they come here for work and not for a date? But the excited young man asked, did Esmeralda not enjoy the masquerade ball? For earlier she had said that it had a good atmosphere, but the girl only grudgingly remarked that she'd enjoyed the atmosphere even for less than 5 minutes. So it was strange enough that he asked such a thing. But the next moment kissed the girl's hand, Alfin Midford promised that next time he would be sure to see to it that Esmeralda Vines had more fun. And she was madly embarrassed by this gesture, thinking that she should not have succumbed to the young man's charms. She thought that she should not have succumbed to the young man's charms. But at that moment, while she was thinking, Garou came up to them and smilingly looked at the girl and asked if this was the famous girl who had become his friend's lover. And then the reality fell upon the protagonist that she did indeed appear to be the lover of a young man after all. He had even come to her father and asked permission for their relationship and the marriage that would follow. But grudgingly remembering what had happened today, she held back as best she could from showing her displeasure, and told Garou that he was indeed right, and she was the young man's lover. But Alfin did not seem to notice her displeasure and asked Garou if they had finished transporting the prisoners. And the young man only awkwardly remarked that most of the arrested had already been dispatched, and the injured had been taken from the dungeon and were almost finished putting everything in order. Then he took out a black flower and gave the young men a close look at it, and said that a beast had also been discovered in the prison, locked in a secret room. And when they got there, they saw the 3-headed monster who was growling madly, trying to get away. And then the excited Esmeralda Vines looked at him and asked who he was. And a maddeningly disgruntled Alfin concentrated that they had managed to create it with him after all. But at that moment, taking them out of their thoughts, Garou asked Alfin Midford what they should have done with the beast. He had left the decision-making to the young man, but he calmly said that the beast had to be burned and destroyed immediately. At that moment, Esmeralda Vines approached him excitedly and asked what was going on, and who the beast was and what the flower meant. But he only looked at her excitedly and told her that he would tell her only because she really needed to know. Said that it was about the black German iris. At the same time, the man was very dissatisfied because it took an insane amount of technology and money to create the chimera, and they just took it and burned it. Then they quite reported that people were really stupid since they didn't understand the beauty of science and nature. At this point, the girl who had been standing quietly nearby asked the boss what their next steps would be, but he just calmly informed her that they had to leave things as they were. But then the already agitated girl said that because of the ruined auction, they'd lost a significant portion of their fortune. And the man shouted that most of the sponsors who knew his abilities had been captured. But the young man with the bright scarlet eyes only said that everything would stay as it was for now, because hide and seek is always fun to play, especially when the one who is looking is trying so hard. At this time, the girl was tormented by the memory of her father yelling at her and wondering why she was doing useless things because she was a girl and should get married because it was her duty, and wondering how long she was going to do what she wanted and not what was necessary. But she was agitated and covered her ears, trying not to hear all this horror. But when she opened her eyes, she saw a worried young man looking at her and asked if she was all right. She only apologized and said she had fallen asleep and wondered what he was talking about. Alfin Midford looked at her with a smile And at that moment, the girl realized how embarrassing it was to fall asleep right in the middle of the conversation. But the guy calmly said that apparently the girl was tired and suggested that she talk later. But she said with all determination that she was ready to listen to him now, and said that her fatigue was due to the fact that she hadn't slept well last night, and promised that from now on she would be fully focused. And then the young man remembered everything that had happened yesterday. He realized that yesterday they had actually come home late because of work, and Esmeralda Vines must have slept badly because of yesterday's events. So he understood. But then the protagonist remembered Prince Kaiser and wondered if he had returned home safely. But Alf and Minford only cheerfully reported that all was indeed well. And fortunately, they had no cause for war. But at this moment of reflection, Esmeralda Vines inquired about the Black Iris. For earlier, Alf and Minford had mentioned a bad organization and said she would like to know a little more about them. And then thinking about it, Alfin said that this is an abnormal organization, and it is made up of people who are dissatisfied with society, as well as those who rebelled against the emperor's rule. And they do things that go beyond common sense. Then the protagonist wondered if by such things he meant something like yesterday's auction, and Alfin Midford agreed, saying that these people were doing it for their own purposes, but he hadn't yet had time to sort out the whole organization. And in this organization also stands Dr. Victor, who has been expelled from academia. And then the excited girl inquired, is this Dr. Vi, of whom he had spoken earlier? He, confirming her speculation, reported that the man was indeed insane, and he was doing his research which is not recognized as academic or ethical. And also the guy was able to find out that the man now works for Black Iris and creates monsters. Then, nervously rasping his fingers in a lock, reported that all members of the organization, including this doctor, were true madmen, so they needed to keep a close eye on their activities. And the girl inquired if that was his task. And having received his consent, she went to Alfred Midford and said she had a request. And then sadly said that yesterday she had realized how helpless she had been, and she would not want to be a burden to the young man in the future. Then rose resolutely from her seat and asked Alfred Midford to teach her fencing, and informed her that she had already mastered some of the basics of the rapier. She looked at the young man and asked him to help her further her education so that she could become a better person. Initially, Alfred Midford tried to talk her out of it, but when he saw her, he decided and told her that he would talk to Lillian about it. And Esmeralda Vines only wondered why her maid was here. But then Alfred Midford calmly explained that the girl was a skilled swordswoman, and she would learn the basics with her, and then he would personally train her. When she heard this, the girl literally glowed and asked if he was making a promise to her. But at that moment, they were interrupted by Garou, who said that his lateness was due to the fact that he had to be a little late at work. Then he greeted Lady Esmeralda Vines and said that he was Garou, the second principal of the imperial family. And then the main character, mad, frightened, and shocked, immediately curtsied and apologized, saying that yesterday she could not greet him as she should because of the situation, and apologized for her rudeness. But the guy only laughed, looking at such a worried girl, and said that he is not so fixated on norms, so she should not have worried, and the girl should just take him as a friend of her fiancé. And then Garou reported that from what he'd heard yesterday, that dummy Alfin had asked the lady out on a first date and ruined everything. Then he started looking for something in his jacket and said that since this case ended safely, he came here because he had another good event for two people to go on a date. Then holding out an envelope to her, he said that it was a letter from his elder brother inviting him to an evening that the crown prince was organizing, and it would take place in 3 days, and asked if the girl would agree to go there. And she happily accepted the envelope and said that it was an insanely great offer and thanked him. Then she began to think about what she should have worn on this date, and Garou only looked at his friend and wondered if he felt nothing looking at the happy face of his beloved. But at that moment, he looked at the protagonist with a smile and said that as an apology for last night's incident, he would like to give her a dress for this evening. And she, jumping up and down with mad joy, thanked him for such a thing. And then Garou leaned closer to Alfred Midford and asked if he thought his lover was really a maddeningly nice girl. In the end, the next day, the young man helping the protagonist down from the carriage told her that she could choose the most desirable dress or anything, and whatever it was, it would be her gift. Then he, seated on a chair in the boutique, informed the girl that she could go quietly to choose dresses. And before he left, a slightly embarrassed Esmeralda Vines, who was already ready to throw herself on all those shelves with clothes. She wondered if Alfred Minford would mind if the dress selection took a little longer than he expected. But to her relief, the boy said they were in no hurry, so Esmeralda Vines could choose something suitable without rushing. After that, the girl began to go through the shelves and think about the different dresses, looking at them and thinking what suited her best. But there were really few outfits to her taste. After all, some were too open and some were too childish. Well, here she finally spotted the literally perfect yellow dress, which she reached for to try on. But at that moment, another girl snatched the dress from her hands. The protagonist, looking at her, said that this dress she saw first, but she only shouted at her and asked if she could not let go of this dress at last, because she had already chosen it first. And then, looking at this girl, the main character immediately realized that it was the same lady who had fallen that time and indignantly searched for the culprit of her fall. After that, the girl said that she needed this dress for an important event, so the protagonist should have just given up. But the girl only mentally remarked that this lady had a really disgusting character. After that, she calmly said that this dress was also needed for an important event, but she only wondered angrily if the girl was really trying to take the dress away. At this point, they were approached by a worried salesman who asked if he could help. And then the red-haired girl said that she wanted to buy a dress that the protagonist did not want to let go. But she, in turn, said that it was not true. It was the dress she wanted to buy. And all this was watched with great embarrassment by Alfin Midford, who did not know how to feel about it and how to behave in such a situation, so he just remained silently observing. And then the salesman awkwardly announced that this dress was a limited edition this season, so someone had to back out. And then the red-haired girl, clutching the dress, grudgingly informed that the protagonist should definitely have given up that dress, because she was the one who should be wearing it. But the red-haired girl was a little uncomfortable about it. At this moment, Alfin Midford approached, and pointing to the blue outfit, said that he seemed to have found the perfect dress to match the girl's beautiful red hair, and it would suit her better than any of the others. And then she gazed at his beautiful face and thought that his words were meaningless. And insanely shocked by this behavior, the protagonist literally could not believe that Alfin Midford had now chosen a dress for this girl. Then the man smiled happily at the lady and told her that this dress would be his gift to the beautiful lady, so he asked her to accept it. At this point, the mad, upset protagonist just couldn't find the words to comment on it. But at that moment, Alf approached her and informed her that the dress she had chosen was not bad either, and the protagonist simply agreed. As a result, after some more time, they were in the carriage, and Esmeralda Vines was silent during the whole trip, being in herself and her thoughts. And then excited, Alfin asked what was the reason for her silence. The girl calmly said that she just had to think, but it was obvious that she was very offended. Then she got out of the carriage and said that she thought it was necessary to start a fencing lesson now. And the excited Alfin Midford asked why the suddenness of it. But the girl only said that she thought it would be worth her while to study.
And then Alfin Midford said that in that case, he would be sure to tell Lillian to get everything ready. At this point, the maximally self-satisfied protagonist thought that her weapon skills were actually not that bad. After that, she put on some suitable clothes and tidied up her hair, and thought it was a pity that she would take her feelings about the situation out on the maid. But she wasn't going to give in to the girl. But in the end, Lillian calmly knocked the rapier out of her hands, and the protagonist literally could not think that they would have such a huge difference in abilities. But at this point, the excited girl approached the protagonist and asked if she was okay. But she only excitedly looked at the girl in front of her and said that she really wasn't her opponent either. But Lillian calmly said that she was also quite surprised, because she hadn't expected the Count's daughter to have such excellent skills. But after reporting that if the protagonist had been calm at the time of the lunges, the right shots would have been taken. And she was clearly emotional, and her movements were easy to read. After that, she asked what happened when she went out to choose an outfit, and then the protagonist told her about the whole situation. And the excited Lily, she only said that it was indeed an insanely unpleasant situation. And then, insanely displeased with the protagonist, she asked how her fiancé could be so nice to another girl because he didn't even help her choose. And she was insanely upset. Then, thinking about it, Lillian said that she fully understood what the lady was feeling, and perhaps it was because their master was in a relationship for the first time, so she asked the girl to accept the situation. But at this point, the excited protagonist literally couldn't believe what she had just said. Because how could a guy be in a relationship for the first time having such a beautiful appearance? But the girl calmly explained that it was really the first time a guy so urged all the maid of the mansion to take care of her. Lillian said that she didn't need anything, as the protagonist was his first lover. Then the protagonist folded her hands in a lock and said that it was quite unexpected information for her, because she thought that the guy was quite skilled in love. But Lillian only said that the gentleman had good manners towards girls, but he knew nothing about love. And thinking about it, the protagonist plunged into her dreams that they were the first from each other, which made her madly happy. The next moment, Lillian approached her and whispered something informing her that this was a great way to solve the problem, and then hearing about it, the protagonist glowed happily and thanked the girl, saying that she had indeed recommended her something excellent. In the end, after a while, the protagonist found herself at dinner together with Alfin. It is excited. Looking around, her boyfriend reported that the girl looks really very happy. But she calmly explained that she was looking forward to the evening in 2 days. But then she calmly reflected that she would soon be able to fulfill what she had in mind. And in the end, when she was getting out of the carriage, she pretended to slip and began to fall. And at that moment, the young man carefully picked her up and awkwardly asked if she was okay. But the protagonist only embarrassedly thanked her for saving her, and reflected that her plan had been initiated, and then leading her onward to the mansion asked her to be careful. The heroine promised that she would definitely try. In the end, when they went inside, the madly admiring protagonist literally couldn't believe that the banquet hall in the Imperial Palace could be so large and beautiful. But Alfin Midford calmly informed that such an event was often organized in the Imperial Palace, and if she liked it, they would come here more often. And then the protagonist looked at the young man carefully and said that if he proposed such a thing, she would regard it as a promise. And Alfin Midford only nodded in agreement and convinced her that it was a promise. But at that moment, their atmosphere was interrupted by Guru, who said hello to the young man and called him closer, and then the protagonist carefully informed him that he should not worry and quietly go to say hello to the guy, and she will find something to do. But he only excitedly asked if he could really leave. But the girl said that she would go and try all kinds of sweets prepared by the royal confectioners. But in the end, after a moment, the girl noticed that Alfin Midford was beside that not very obliging lady who was trying to take away her dress. So she thought excitedly that this could not go on, and she would have to start the main points of the plan a little early. So she literally, in a second approaching the young man, greeted the lady, but the lady only grudgingly inquired who the girl was. And then Alfin Midford introduced them and informed them that this was Esmeralda Vanes, and then informed Esmeralda that the girl in front of her was Roxana Artemis. But the protagonist only grudgingly reflected that now was not the right moment for pleasantries and formalities. But at that moment, their tension did not remain independent of Guru, who excitedly approached the girls and said that he had to take his friend away for a while to talk. Then he approached Roxana and, kissing her hand, asked that the girl generously forgive him and said goodbye. And Alfin Midford, that followed him, looked around at the girls and said that he would be back soon. As he left, the protagonist smiled at the girl in front of her and told her that Alfin Midford was her lover. But she only wondered what the protagonist wanted to tell her, to which she calmly explained that they were in a relationship that would be fixed by marriage. But Roxanne only wondered what Esmeralda Vines was trying to accomplish by talking like that. After all, they were still single. Then, looking at the stubborn lady in front of her, the protagonist realized that she wasn't sure if she could win this conversation. Roxanne then said that she too was madly in love with Alfin Midford, and that was why she wanted to make him hers, adding that there was still no man who could resist seeing her beauty. So approached the protagonist and carefully looked at her and asked if she wanted to surrender, because it was the best option for her. In the end, the protagonist drifted away and thought that Alfin was her lover anyway. But afterwards, she realized that she was a little worried, because the young man had never talked about the feelings he had for her, and she doubted whether the young man thought she was really his lover. At this time, Alfin Midford bowed down to greet His Highness the Crown Prince, but he only calmly thanked the young man for successfully completing the job and said that the Emperor was insanely pleased. But Alfin Midford calmly said that to do this job would be a duty because he had to eliminate the Emperor's worries. So he didn't need to be praised for it every time. But the Crown Principal looked at him calmly and only laughed, and said that the young man's main problem was that he was too hard on himself, but then asked if he really had a lover, and then Alfin Midford, remembering the girl, calmly said that his lover, this is just a means to carry out the orders of His Majesty the Emperor. But hearing this, the Crown Prince calmly said that a guy shouldn't treat the lady like this, and he really hoped that this girl could help him in the future. But then he stopped the lad when Alfin Midford was about to leave and handed him a letter, saying that it was from his father. And Alfin Midford took it and thought that perhaps it was a new order, which would be connected with the Black Iris. The man only calmly said that he was not sure about it, but he wanted the guy to do his best this time, because the Emperor was always grateful to him for his work. But the guy smiled calmly and said that it was a great honor for him to work for the Emperor. And then hearing about it, the Crown Prince asked Alfin Midford to try to get rid of the Black Rice as soon as possible, for of late their movements had been very unusual, which aroused suspicion, and on reflection Alfin Midford said that he would certainly carry out the order. In the end, when they came out, Guru grudgingly said that his older brother was getting him a bit worked up. After all, he was asking in a hurry to get rid of an organization that hadn't even been tried for several years, and it was probably easy enough for his brother to talk about something like that. But Alfin Midford calmly looks at the letter, said that surely His Highness the Crown Prince is really worried about it, and asks them to deal with it as soon as possible, because most likely the letter that the Emperor gave him contains concerns about this organization. But at that moment, Guru tried to snatch the letter in order to read what was in it. But the young man calmly informed that he had promised not to work today. On hearing this, Guru only smiled and wondered if he had promised something like this to his girlfriend. And when he heard an approving answer, he smiled madly and said that he liked that his friend finally had a sweetheart. But he only looked at him calmly and asked why he himself would not start dating someone if he liked it so much. But he calmly said that he could not become a lover for all these people at once, and said that it was hard enough to be a man who was in the heart of all the girls of the empire. But Alfin Midford only smiled at such a naive narcissism of his friend, and informed that they could end there for the day, and he would return to the protagonist.
But as soon as he came down the stairs, the girl ran up to him excitedly and told him that she had been waiting for him and hugged him tightly. And Alfin Midford only scrutinized her flushed face and asked, I wondered if she had had too much to drink. Then I stated that the girl had probably had a lot of fun at tonight's party, but she calmly said that it was not so. She was only happy when Alfin Midford was with her. But Alfin Midford continued to talk only to other girls, and so she was madly upset by this. Then approaching the young man, she inquired whether he really considered her for his sweetheart. But at that moment, they were distracted by a girl who came in and said that she had been a little saddened by Alfin Midford's departure, but she was madly glad that he had returned. Then approaching and putting her arm around him, she asked if the young man would like to go and find a quiet place to talk. And the protagonist, acting mad impulsively and without thinking of the consequences, took the man by the arm and pulled him closer to her, after which she kissed him in front of the lady and resolutely declared that she would feel the last time that Alfin Midford was her lover. Then she began to lose consciousness because she had had too much to drink. Then Alfin Midford gently held her down and apologized to the girl that they had to go and said that his beloved was intoxicated, and so they had to go first. And watching from the sidelines was Guru, who was really madly surprised that the young man had done such a thing. It was a really surprising turn of events. Eventually, while in the carriage, Alfin Midford scrutinized the sleeping Esmeralda, and each time she remembered her question about whether the man considered her a lover. Then he immediately recalled how he had confessed to the Crown Prince that this girl was merely a means to carry out the orders of His Majesty the Emperor. And so with a kind of sadness in his face, he wondered if the protagonist would still be there for him if they found out what he thought of her. As a result, the protagonist woke up in the morning and had an insanely bad headache, after which she began to remember the previous nights and was not happy that last night she appeared before Alfin as not the most chaste girl. But then she remembered the kiss and was shocked and didn't know what to do and wondered what was wrong with her and why things never went according to her plan. But at that moment, Lilia entered the room and said that she had prepared the morning tea for Esmeralda, and she had news that the gentleman wanted to have tea with her and inquired what she should give to the young man. And then the heroine awkwardly reflected that apparently Alfin Midford wanted to talk about her mistake of yesterday, whereupon she asked Lillian to tell Alfin Midford that the heroine would appear at the tea party. In the end, they were sitting in the greenhouse, and then Alfin said that he was madly sorry to talk about yesterday. They had not been able to enjoy the evening together, but the girl calmly said that she was ashamed of it because she had only planned to have a few drinks. And then, looking at her embarrassed face, Alfin Midford said that it seemed that the girl was completely unaware of her norm, and he should remember it for the future, and the protagonist was thinking only that she was very embarrassed. But the guy calmly said that last night was hardly a substitute for a working day, so he prepared them a joint tea party to spend the day together, and the protagonist only thanked him happily for such care. But at that moment, after looking her over carefully, the young man asked if the protagonist still wanted to know the answer to the question she had asked yesterday. But the girl only awkwardly asked him to forget about that question, then explained that she was ashamed of herself for doubting a man despite the fact that Alfin Midford had worked so hard for her, then apologized. But at first, the shocked man immediately took himself in hand, after which he informed the girl that she was an insanely kind person. And the protagonist, only looking at his face, thought that now she certainly could not tell him about what she had planned in Lillian. At this time, the black rice lady was unhappily looking over the man lying on the ground who asked her why she was being so cruel to him. But she coldly informed that the man had previously asked her to go out with him himself after just a few drinks. But he just shakily grabbed her skirt, realizing his mistake, and asked her to spare him. It was the best option in a situation like this, because there was nothing he could do. But the girl only waved her fan, and then the black as night dogs at once pounced upon the man, and she only grudgingly wiped her dress, which the man had soiled with his hands. At that moment, a young man approached her and praised Mrs. Alicia for a job well done, but she only looked at him calmly and asked him to take the body quickly to Dr. Victor's laboratory. She was not going to do it herself, as there were enough people in the organization. The man tried to argue, but she calmly told him to stop. Then she added that she had to talk to her boss. And at the same time, her boss stood on the roof and smilingly contemplated what other bait to leave this time, so that the Imperial dog would follow their trail. At this time, the boss of the Black Iris organization went to His Highness, the First Prince, and greeted him, but he only looked at the young man unhappily and asked why such greetings were necessary, and immediately asked how long he had to wait. But the excited young man only said that he only had to wait a little longer, because he should have realized that such things are not done so easily. But the insanely disgruntled prince reported that he seemed to have invested quite a lot of money to gather all those disgruntled with the current emperor and crown prince's rule. The man agreed, but calmly explained that even so we had the emperor's dog was good enough, and then carefully looking at the man first, Prince Diego said that he would definitely have to hurry up, for his mother was extremely unsatisfied with their pure failure. Then when it came to the Empress, then the boss of the organization immediately conveyed the majesty of Empress Regina his respects. But the prince only grudgingly told the man not to even dare to say her name with his mouth. After which the boss of the Black Iris organization added that the mood of the people right now was just unstable, and the current state of affairs might be shaken, after which he said with a smile that the Black Rice organization would make every effort to make His Highness the Prince ascend the throne. In the morning, the protagonist excitedly approached Alfin and asked if he had heard the rumors that have been circulating among the townspeople that someone is committing serial murders without distinction of sex and age. Moreover, the bodies were marked as if they were bitten by an animal. Then she added that for this reason, people were scared out of their minds that it could really be a werewolf. But Alfin calmly said that this case had been written about in a letter from the emperor that he had received recently, and that was why he had just returned from the imperial family because of this problem. And then added that although no official statement had been made, the Black Irises were definitely involved, for they left iris blossoms, thereby claiming that they were involved in the murder. Whereupon the man said that they were on their way to catch this werewolf today. But seeing the displeasure of the main character, the man came closer and took her by the hands and asked the girl to help him, and in the end, she still agreed. Then, dressed up in a suitable outfit, she approached the young man. And now they were among the streets of the city, and then he promised the protagonist that he would always be near, so she should not worry. The girl was only unhappily thinking that she had been made a decoy, which she was madly pleased about. But afterwards, she convinced herself that she really didn't have to worry, for she was in no danger. After that, walking through the streets, I thought that it was not too late, but there was no one on the street anyway. And most likely it was due to the fear of the townspeople before the unknown monster. But then she felt movement behind her and heard a sound on the side. And when she turned around, she saw a monster of enormous size standing in front of her, its paw raised to strike. And the last thing she could do was excitedly call out to the young man, who at the last moment managed to run up and inflict his gift, thereby depriving the turnover of her arm. Alfin then asked if the protagonist was all right. And when he was satisfied that she was indeed all right, he turned to the werewolf and asked if he could speak human. But never got any answer, you began to attack him. The werewolf was really fast and agile, so he could move from rooftop to rooftop with ease. And Alfin Mitford couldn't keep up with him. And when the monster had finally disappeared, Alfin Mitford explained to the worried protagonist that the monster was definitely created by Dr. Victor, because no one else can create such monsters but him. But afterwards, he noticed excitedly that the girl began to fall slowly because her legs had been weakened. And then he recognized that she was indeed very frightened and asked if she could walk. But Esmeralda Vanes, shaking with fear, assured him that everything was all right and asked him to return to the mansion. In the end, when they were there, they sat talking over a mug of tea, and the man asked if she was better. But she calmly assured him that she was, and told him that Alfin Mitford had said earlier that it was all to do with Black Iris, and confessed to the fellow that she could not understand one thing. What was the conclusion to the creation of such monsters? But Alfin Mitford calmly said that, as he had previously said, these people were dissatisfied with the current emperor's rule, but he wasn't sure if he understood everyone's plans. However, their main goal was to disturb the current peace and create chaos in the society. Then, looking at the shocked face of the protagonist, he added that he could not understand all the goals and methods of achieving them. But at this point, the protagonist wondered if the werewolf they had seen had previously been created as a result of an inhuman experiment. But Alfin Mitford calmly informed him that it was so. It was Dr. Victor's experiments. At this point, the protagonist, looking him over with determination, said that the fact that these people were taking innocent lives and causing chaos, and it's really awful, and there's no forgiveness for anyone involved. But then Alfin Mitford said he was doing everything he could to catch this organization, and now he needed her help. But she quietly agreed, and then putting her hand to her heart, confidently informed her that they could not allow people to trembling with fear forever. And seeing such a determined girl, Alfin Mitford just smiled affectionately at her. But after rising from his seat, he calmly informed her that it was already late enough for tonight, so she should have gone to bed. And tomorrow they would go looking for the werewolf again. The girl only agreed. Then she went back to her room, and at that moment the werewolf without an arm returned to Dr. Victor in their shelter. And the man, looking at him worriedly, asked what had happened to him, and immediately began to look fearfully at his wound, and then promised that now they would go to the laboratory and he would definitely fix it. As a result, the next morning, the still somewhat sleepy protagonist yawned, and Alfin Mitford looked at her and said that she must have been very tired, for they had been walking down the street every night for a week. But Esmeralda Vines calmly reported that she was glad nothing had happened this week, and that maybe the monster could have just disappeared. At that moment, looking at the young man so insanely thoughtful, the girl realized that it was unlikely. And then the boy said that the Black Iris would not give up so easily, and then said that if Esmeralda was very tired, she could rest today. At that moment, she said firmly that there would be no rest, for she would also be helping Alfin Mitford today. At first, he wanted to argue, but then with a smile, he asked her to do her best today. And the protagonist ended up wandering the streets quietly, as she had done all week before, in order to attract the monster. And at that moment, she literally felt something huge coming towards her in her back, but she didn't have time to react. And then at the last moment, grabbing the girl's arm, Alfin Mitford, who seemed madly frightened that the girl had almost hurt herself, was able to pull her away from the blow, and then excitedly inquired if she was all right. But she assured him that she was all right. Then she thought that the monster had finally appeared, but she didn't understand what happened to him. And then Alfin Mitford took a close look at him and said that apparently Dr. Victor had decided to sew a new arm on him, and now he seemed much more threatening. After which the guy bared his sword and informed the protagonist that it was now quite dangerous here. So she started to stay behind him, and then having conducted the first series of attacks, which did little to nothing to hurt the monster, Alfred Midford realized that it would not be so easy. But the next moment, the monster instantly jumped so high that it was now in the air higher than the houses, and then grabbed the girl's hand that began to forcefully lead her away. Although he realized that they would not be able to escape far, so they urgently needed to think of something. But at that moment, he was approached by the main character who said that she had an idea. And eventually, they went to the temple, after which she jumped on the boat, followed rather expectantly by the monster. And then the girl turned on him and shouted to Alfred Midford that he ought to have acted. And she grabbed the monster and pushed it into the water and flew with it. And the boy in flight, reacting quickly, was able to cut off its head. But the protagonist was still sure of it. So being in the water, she was still wondering if they had succeeded. Then looking at the drowning body, already devoid of life, she realized that they had succeeded. Then when she swam out, she immediately found a young man with the head of the beast in his hands, who praised Esmeralda for having done well. And thanks to her, he was able to finish the job much faster. But she only thanked him for his praise and asked him to help her get out. And he did so, informing her that the girl had done a great job and her plan today was really awesome. But she was a little embarrassed to say that it seemed to concern him as well, for he had done most of the work, and then awkwardly thanked Alfred Midford for saving her. If he had not done so, or if he had been too late, she would have been left lying breathless in an alley somewhere. But after a cold wind blew, and she started sneezing as she was soaked. But noticing the frozen girl, the young man immediately took off his cloak and gently covered her shoulders, then asked if they could now return to their home. In the morning, the main character woke up with a wild runny nose and realized that she was definitely sick, which she was not happy about, and she did not know what to do now. But at that moment, a young man knocked at her room and asked if he could come in for a little while, and the girl allowed him to do so, although she did not understand for what purpose he had come. Then the guy came in and approached her bed and gently touched her forehead with the back of his hand and asked her if her fever was still not going to go down. But she calmly said that she was really fine, and it was just a slight fever. Then she asked how it had gone and if his case had been closed, but the man said he had just returned from the palace, where he had presented the emperor with the severed head of the monster as proof, and then handed the head over to the police. But it was presented to the public as the fault of ordinary wolves, not werewolves. And then the protagonist thought about it and realized that it was done in order not to alarm the people, and literally glowed and said that she was madly glad that the case had ended safely. But at that moment, Alfred Midford looked at her earnestly and said that he was amazed that a girl in such a critical situation could come up with such a wonderful idea. But afterward reported that it was pretty reckless. But she just calmly reported that she really, really wanted to help him. And it worked out well in the end, and no one got hurt. But at that moment approaching her, the guy informed her that he understood her intention, but he wanted the girl to think more about her safety. And he was talking about it now as her lovers, because he was worried about her. After that, while the protagonist was literally burning with embarrassment and shame, he calmly said that he would go, as he still had to sort out the documents from the imperial palace. At this point, the excited protagonist asked him to stop, and when he complied, she asked if they could have dinner together tonight. After that, the guy gave her his consent and went to do his business, and the girl, still excited, remembered his phrase that he was concerned about her as her lover. And so the girl was sure that he cared about her. But at this time, the man wondered what had caused such strange feelings toward this girl, but explained to himself that he was still thinking of using this lady in his affairs. But this time, it was too dangerous. That was why he was starting to worry, not because he felt anything more for her. After that, he looked at the room of the protagonist for the last time and thought about something and resolutely turned around and went away to do more important things.